So a function in Python is a set of statements that takes in an input and does some, computation or procedure on it. And in Python, there'll be times when you want a certain function to run in your program and you don't want to have to rewrite that code over and over again. So you define a function and you tell it what that function's purpose is, and then anytime you want that purpose to happen, you call the function. And so it's a block of code that only runs when it's called. So you pass it data, like the inputs of the function, and we call them parameters. It works on it, it runs that code on the data you passed it, and it returns something to you. It can return data to you as a result. And so the way we define a function is we say def, we name the function, and we, in parentheses, put the argument, put the colon to start your your block of text, your block of code, and you have this indented action block. This is what you do every time you call that function. So you have to put these letters define, def, at the very beginning. You name your function, and then you put the inputs in there. And the inputs can be one thing, they can be two things, they can be lots of things separated by commas. The action block is what you want the function to do. So we have some functions already that we've talked about. We talked about the length function. If you remember this, length with parentheses, and it gave you the length of a list. So that's a function that's already defined in Python to give you the length of a list. Another function is the print function. So you do print parentheses, whatever the parameter is inside those parentheses, the Python's going to output that printed to you. Another predefined function in Python is the range. And the range function gives you a list of values. When you talk about range, you have to give it the starting point, the ending point, and what you want to count by, unless you want to count by one. If you want to count by one, then you can just leave that third argument out. So one thing to think about with the range is it stops one number before the end, which I know is kind of weird. So for instance, if I said range 1, 3, this output would give me a list that had 1 and 2 in it. If I said range 2, 16, 3, it's going to start counting at 2. It's going to count by 3s, so 2, 5, 8, 11, 14. If you add 3 to there, you're going to get 17, which is bigger than this ending value here. So that's going to be the end of my list that this range function outputs. So let's talk about a function. So here's an example of a function. So I've defined this function. Remember, I put these words def, those letters def, and I named it. So the name of this function is even odd, and its input is x, an integer. And this indented block of code is what the function does. So anytime I call this function in my program, it's going to do this indented block of code. And so the indented block of code says if x percentage 2 or x mod 2 is equal to 0. So remember, in an if statement, you have to give the condition. So this is my condition. If this condition is met, meaning the remainder, when I divide by 2 is 0, then this function is going to print out even. Otherwise, it's going to print out odd. So to call the function, I would say even odd, that's the name. I would put a number in here, 7. So if I called the function in my program and I said even odd of 7, this function would print out odd because 7 divided by 2 has a remainder of 1, so it's going to be in the else category. If you called the function again, even odd of 12, this would print out even because 12 divided by 2 has a remainder of 0.